It was the summer of '98, a hot California desert. I was 5 years old riding shotgun in my mom's crappy little convertible. It barely ran, but the seats were red velvet. The radio worked, and being able to take the top down almost made up for the lack of air conditioning. My days were normally spent at daycare or the babysitters, as my single student mom put in long hours at her job to provide for us. I didn't mind. It just meant that days like today were even more special. My mom was driving me across to the next county to my cousin's house for a birthday party that was going to be complete with dress-up games and ice cream cake. To truly seal the deal, she had taken us to McDonald's right before we headed out on our drive. I got a Happy Meal with a stuffed Simba from The Lion King as my toy. That'll be important later. Our convertible eased onto the freeway, and for the most part, it was a pleasant and uneventful ride. I remember the loud noise of the cars and the hot wind. I first became aware of the truck as it lays on its horn behind us. I turned in my seat to see a huge gray monster of a truck tailgating us ridiculously close. As soon as it was safe, my mom changed to the slow lane on the right of the freeway, assuming that the truck would pass us. He pulls level to our car, rolls down the window and begins screaming at us to pull over, in the middle of the desert on a freeway. My mom ignores him and tells me to do the same. I remember feeling uneasy but less scared than annoyed. Kind of like, dude, come on, this is my day to have fun, leave us alone. And besides, I wasn't really a stranger to angry shouting men, even at that age. Unfortunate but true. I think the lack of reaction irritated the man, or maybe this had been his plan the entire time. But he swiftly pulls into our lane and essentially forces us off the road onto the shoulder. My mom does her best to maintain control of the car and to not make contact with the other vehicle, but that's pretty much impossible. The unmistakable crunch of metal rings out and both vehicles come to a stop. Again, on the side of a desert freeway, there wasn't really a lot of places for us to go and there wasn't really anybody else around. My mom checks me to see if I'm okay and remains in her seat. Now, if I were her, I don't know if I would have waited to confront this man with a child in my car after that stunt. However, my ma has and always will be the tough as nails type of gal who isn't afraid of anything, especially when she feels like she's been wronged. And of course, she had no idea what was to happen next. In a flash of anger and cursing, the man is at the driver's side door, screaming about the damage done to his car and how it was caused because of food trash that had been flying out of the convertible, landing on his front window and blocking the view. He starts demanding compensation, that my mom get out of the car and come and look at his car. At this point, my mom refuses to get out of the car. She points at a call box a fair distance away, you remember those, and said that it was best to call the cops and let them handle this. Not the answer the angry man had wanted. In one fluid moment, this man grabs the back of my mother's head, and once, twice, and 3 times, smashes it into the steering wheel, leaving her unconscious. Lifting her like a sack of potatoes, he drops her on the side of the road and jumps into the driver's seat, keys still in the ignition, and he starts the car up. I haven't even reacted yet. I think I was in an absolute state of shock. It wasn't until I felt the car moving and getting back on the road that I registered what had happened. And when it hit me hard. I went ballistic. I was no longer just annoyed with this man, I was now furious for what he did to my mom. I remember that I held my stuffed Simba by the tail as I climbed out of my seat, and began screaming while whipping the man in the face, trying to blind him. My battle cry, I'll always remember it, was, "You're the meanest man in the whole world." I clawed and kicked and gave no care to what was going to happen to me, just that this man was going to pay. This led to a couple of things happening. First, I made it impossible to drive that car safely, and he ended up crashing into another shoulder. Second, by this time, people had started to see a combination of a woman lying on the shoulder and a convertible with a Tasmanian devil of a 5-year-old beating up some creeper, and they began to alert the authorities. I don't remember too much after that. I remember the cops coming and sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They gave me a teddy bear and asked me a lot of questions, and my grandma came and picked me up. My mom went to the hospital where she thankfully didn't have any major damage, just a busted up nose and some whiplash. I never made it to my cousin's party, and never saw that white convertible again. I'll always be thankful for my main man Simba having my back through all of that. I don't know what that man's intentions were. Looking back and knowing the area that we lived in, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if drugs played a major part in all of this. This happened about 10 years ago, and at the time, I was a 14-year-old male, and I was enrolled in high school. My mom worked at a nearby apartment complex as a manager, so she would pick me up from school at 2:40 and bring me home instead of having to ride the bus for a couple hours. The day is completely normal so far. She picks me up from school, then brings me home. No more than 10 minutes after I'm home, a black car pulls up in the driveway and I hear a hard knock on the door. I look through the glass on the front door and I can clearly see a man wearing a hoodie in the summer, laying on the ground in front of the door. I guess he assumed he was completely hidden because my mom had a wreath on the door, and the space between the window and bottom of the door was wide enough that someone could probably assume I couldn't see them. Well, I saw him. I ran and grabbed the house phone and called the police from the kitchen, where I could see the car. I had a machete. I was a teenager that thought swords and stuff were cool, don't judge me. And I waited around the corner of the door while still on the phone with the police. At this point, the man knocks again. So I took matters into my own hands and I yell as loud as I can, "Leave now or I'll freaking kill you." I had a pretty deep voice for my age. Thank you, early puberty. So I guess he thought that I was a full-grown man, because this man got up and hauled butt like an Olympic sprinter. So about 3 minutes or so passed and the police get to my house. We had no cameras or anything, so there's really nothing to go off of to pursue this person. The cops pretty much tell me that I handled the situation well and the laws about self-defense. The man never returned, and that was pretty much the end of it. I've looked back on this a lot over the years, and this man almost certainly wanted to rob us. What's the most creepy about this to me is that he most likely had scoped us out, saw that we were just a teenage boy and a single mother, went through the trouble of learning our routines, and waited for what he thought was the ideal moment to rob us. We bought a handgun because of this, so I never really lost any sleep over this because I knew if he came back, that I had a surprise for him too. This happened back in early 2015. I was then a 19-year-old guy living in a rather bad area of Portland, Oregon. Even though there were occasionally some belligerent homeless people and addicts, violent muggings were rare and most of the city felt very safe even at night. One of my best friends had turned 21 and we decided to go bar hopping and go clubbing. I was in a group of about a dozen other people, then 3 of which were my roommates. Unfortunately for me, I was the only one in my group who was either under the legal drinking age or didn't have a fake ID. This meant that I was unable to enter the bar. However, to my luck, there was a nice Mediterranean restaurant right across the street from the bar, which I ended up going to. I stayed there for more than an hour and then I was ready to leave. I've done that walk many times, even at night, so I was never scared. Until this night, of course. From my apartment, my roommates took an Uber to the bar. and this meant that I would have to walk back since I didn't have Uber and my phone battery was running low. The distance back to my apartment was about 3 miles, and the time was already close to midnight and I would be reaching my apartment at around 1 a.m. I decided to walk the distance anyway since I hadn't been at the gym and thought that this would be some good exercise. I began my walk and I passed by lots of different drunks. Even though some of the drunks would shout things at me, I never felt unsafe or threatened by them, so I was okay. However, the last mile to my apartment was through a darkly lit park that can be quite scary at night. Not because of the crime, but because there is only one streetlight on that stretch of road. I reached this somewhat creepy area at around 12:30. As I descend down the dark and narrow street, I notice a black Chevy Silverado speed past me and slow down once he passes me. The truck almost comes to a stop but then decides to drive ahead. I begin to shrug it off at first. However, this is where things start to get creepy. After a walk nearly a quarter mile forwards, the Chevy Silverado comes down the opposite direction, and it does the same thing. When the trucks slow down and almost come to a halt, I begin to panic but not openly show it. I pretend to ignore the vehicle, but my instincts tell me that something isn't right. The truck then starts to proceed, but this time I cannot keep calm. I was not in the middle of a dark and isolated park with no streetlights, and there likely wouldn't be a single person in sight. After I walk about 500 feet more, I begin to look in horror as the same pickup truck comes flying towards me and puts a sudden brake on about 100 feet behind me. One man around twice my age and bald opens the passenger door and comes out of his truck carrying what looked like a hockey club. I look behind and lock eye contact with him. He gives me the most haunting and sinister look I've seen from a real person, and he begins to yell, "Get the heck out of my sight, or I'll mess you up," and he called me an inappropriate name. As I was planning my escape, I remember how there was a wooded area between the park and my apartment. Where I was at, I could cut across the park and go through some woods, and then right across the woods was my apartment. And this was smart because I have taken that shortcut during the day and the truck will not be able to cut through the woods. Just as I ran towards those woods, I heard another yelling in the distance. "Hey, screw you!" yelled another large guy walking on the opposite direction of the sidewalk that I was. I then see another large man walking his German Shepherd towards me. After there, the truck driver then started running at us with his hockey club, and I made a run for it. I darted towards the woods. Fortunately, the truck driver decides not to chase us and he gets back in his truck, and I reach my apartment 5 minutes later. At the parking lot of my apartment, I happened to see the guy walking his dog. He looked like a roughed up bodybuilder, so I was also a little afraid of him too. However, we had a pleasant conversation. I began to head up to my apartment and look at my apartment window, and to my disgust and horror, I see the black Chevy Silverado drive by my apartment and then leave. My friends came back home close to 3 in the morning, just after I went to bed for that night. Thankfully, I never saw that creep again, and I moved out of that apartment a few months later. After this incident, I avoid walking alone in dark spots and isolated areas at night. I've done quite well for myself as an adult, but when I was younger, we were very poor. In middle school, I lived in a government housing project that were like little one-level apartments with 2 apartments sharing a wall each, all spaced apart. There were woods directly behind the cluster of apartments with no gate in between, but no one ever went into the woods, which I learned the reason for due to this incident. These apartments were very poorly made and the windows could easily be popped in and out, never mind a lock. The front door was somewhat sturdy, but with a good kick, it could have easily been opened. My dad was a pretty stocky bodybuilder type, so I had a false sense of security and would leave my window blinds open at night, as my room faced some of the trees that would blow in the wind. I loved nature and I wasn't afraid of the dark, so I liked watching the trees when I fell asleep. Our apartment's front door was facing this woods, as was my friend's behind ours with our building blocking their view. As you walk in the front door, the hallway is on the left, and my room was at the end of the hallway on the right. My big window that took up most of the wall was on the left end. My bed was sideways facing both walls, so I could lay on my side and watch the trees. The woods were about a field away facing our front door, so I couldn't see it from my room. This was just a small area of trees and vegetation. One night, I woke up feeling a sense of unease and through my sleepy haze, made out the figure of a large man standing at my window, watching me sleep with total confidence, not caring at all if he was seen. He was in a big coat and looked quite burly and average to taller height. It was black in my room and outside, just barely illuminated by moonlight. I had just cracked open my eyes and I froze once I realized what I was seeing. I kept my eyes as closed as possible, just enough to peer at him in the darkness, and literally rolled out of my bed to the side, not facing the window, and shouted for my dad who was across the hallway with both of our doors open as I crawled out. Not the smartest, but I was a dumb 12-year-old. He hadn't gone to sleep yet and was in my room in a heartbeat as the guy took off. He went to run out the front door yelling threats as well, which probably wasn't smart, but the guy was long gone. I truly believe he never came in before or after this, just due to my dad's sheer size and build, but I'll never know. A few nights later, I was spending the night at my friend's who lived directly behind us with the same layout. Her room was the first room on the left with her window facing the woods and our apartment blocking the view. Her sisters were on the second on the left, and her mom and toddler sister were in the room on the right, like mine in my own apartment. We finished watching Dave Chappelle and went to do one another's hair in her room, with her older sister helping us, while their mom and little sister went to bed. Not long after, we heard screaming from her mom's room and heavy stomping feet. Her older sister swung open the door to the room that we were in, and there was just a flash of a huge white man in his 30s or 40s running down the hall towards the living room, and the front door, and her mom behind him with a butcher knife hacking at the air and screaming bloody murder. The dude flew out of the door and towards the woods while her mom locked her door and called the police. This man had the audacity to pop open the window and crawl into the bed that was pushed against the window just slightly under it, not realizing this woman was a whole Amazon warrior who slept with a butcher knife and would clearly wake up to protect her baby. She was quick and had slashed at him, though I'm not sure of the damage since I was ushered home directly after. The cops went looking in the woods for him and found him and another man quite similar to him living and hiding out there together. They were also responding to a call from a frantic mother whose little girl had been taken that day as well from our housing units, and they found her with those creeps. She had been there all day and night with them and was around 3 to 4. They were taken to jail, and that's the last I heard of it, as the adults didn't let us in on the adult conversation. Poor little girl was probably traumatized, and I hope she's been able to heal. I can't imagine what could have happened if my friend's mom hadn't been so quick and slept with a weapon, or if he had decided to fight instead of run. I still don't understand why he didn't try to overpower her, but it's probably because she had injured him. After this, my dad explained to me how sometimes addicts or homeless people would hang out in those woods.